In this class, I'll be talking about equilibrium of a monopolist, particularly in the case when a monopolist makes abnormal profits. That, as we have been told in the previous video, that a monopolist can make abnormal profits both in the short run and long run. So, in this video, I'll be talking about the case of abnormal profits of a monopolist. So, in our subsequent videos, we'll be talking about the case of normal profits and also the case of a loss. Now, in this video, we'll be talking about abnormal profit of a monopolist. So, using this diagram. This diagram represents the output, cost, and revenue of a monopolist. Now, look at this y-axis. This y-axis represents the price and cost, and this x-axis represents the output of the monopoly. So don't forget, in a monopoly, there is only one firm in the market, and the product of this firm has no close substitute. In other words, the firm in this market also represents the whole industry. Unlike in a perfect market where there are many firms in the market, but in the case of monopoly, a firm in this market, the firm in this market is the only one, and it represents the entire market. Now, let's go back to the explanation. Now, look at this line. This line represents average revenue curve. And mind the average revenue curve is the same thing as demand curve. And you can see average revenue curve is downward sloping, unlike in a perfect market where you have an horizontal demand curve for each of the firms in the market. Also look at this M out this line, this M out marginal revenue curve. You can see it's also downward sloping, although it's below the average revenue curve. Also look at this curve, marginal cost curve. Also this one represents average cost curve. Now, how do we determine the equilibrium of a monopoly? Generally, the equilibrium position, generally the equilibrium condition for any firm is MC equals to MR. That is, a firm is in equilibrium when MC is equal to MR. Now, whenever we see something like this, a diagram like this, what will come to our mind is the equilibrium condition. Once we remember this, M is equal to MR, so we go to the diagram and we check, try to locate where MC curve and MR curve intersect. You can see this is MC curve here, and this is MR curve. Where did they intersect? They intersect at this point. Okay, that means this point represents our equilibrium. This point represents equilibrium point. So if I want to determine the equilibrium output, I will just trace it down. So when I trace it down, my equilibrium output Q is equal to QE, because that's the output, the unit of output I can locate at that particular point. How will I determine the price, equilibrium price from here? This is the price axis, okay? But this curve where MC meets MR is not the average revenue curve. That is not the demand curve. We can only locate the price on the demand curve. So in other words, we have to trace the same line up until we get to the demand curve. Once this line touches the demand curve, that the dotted line touches the demand curve, so we cannot trace it to the price axis here. For example, you start tracing it from equilibrium. When you trace it here, it touches the demand curve, that is AR curve at point B. Then you trace it back to the price axis here. You can see the price axis here. That means that equilibrium price is PE, not this point, not at this point. So you cannot say this is equilibrium price. So because this MR is not a half cup. Okay, hope that is clear. Now, how do you determine the total revenue of this firm? The total revenue, that is TR of this firm, generally we know total revenue is simply P times Q. So here, the equivalent price we got here is PE, okay, that is PE multiplied by the equivalent quantity now we got is what? QE. This represents our total revenue, firm's total revenue, okay. Now, so alternatively, the total revenue, is equals to, if I want to look at the form of the shape, is equals to O, and I will start from the origin, OPE, then BQE. That is the rectangular area OPE, BQE represents the total revenue. So the area of this rectangle, that is PE times QE. So for example, if you want to know this side, it's simply PE minus 0. So we have PE multiplied by the breadth, that is QE minus 0, we have QE. So you can see this and this are equivalent. Okay. So the total cost is simply AC multiplied by Q. That is the general formula for TC. So how do we know the TC? So by what we did in a perfect market. So we are going to check the equilibrium point, and you check from the equilibrium point, you continue to trace the line until it touches average cost curve. Whenever it touches average cost curve, you can see that it touches average cost curve at point C, then you trace it to the cost axis here. So what we have here is A, meaning that our AC here is A multiplied by Q, that's the equilibrium quantity QE. So that means the total output is equals to, and that means the total cost is equal to A multiplied by QE. That is total cost. So what of total profit now? The profit is simply, don't forget the profit is simply TR minus TC. So in other words, we have PE minus AQE. Okay, AQE. Or simply this rectangular area PABC, or in other words, we have PEABC. So this point represents the abnormal profit, profit, or the monopolist. Abnormal profit or the monopolist. So if the profit is positive, we call it abnormal profit. But if it is zero, we call it normal profit or zero profit. Okay, so if it is negative, that is loss. But in this case, we are dealing with abnormal profit. Okay, you know, wherever the price of the commodity is above the AC curve, the firm will always make abnormal profit. Okay, so in our next video, we'll be talking about another case, that is the case of normal profit, when the monopolist makes a normal profit. Don't forget to like the video, drop your comment, and also share the video.